G'day guys. This one is just going to be a quick one. It's a study that somebody sent me. I've actually seen similar studies, but in sort of low carb, like people doing keto or low carb, and also restricting calories or stuff like that, and looking at sort of uric acid levels and looking at gout and stuff like that, and sort of improvements in terms of those sort of areas, because you lower insulin quite a bit when you're in deep ketosis and stuff like that. But this is the first one that I've actually seen on a high protein, because remember, purines that are in actual meat are always sort of demonized, that, you know, too much meat, if you're consuming high levels of meat, you're going to be really gout and stuff like that. So this is quite an interesting study. It actually relates back to another study which was done in Israel. This was around 2005, called the Direct Study. People did three types of diet. It was the Atkins. There was a high-fat, calorie-restricted Mediterranean style diet, which was 50% fat. And then there was the low fat, sort of, again, calorie restricted type of diet that was done, which is the one that actually at the time Harvard basically were involved in part of that funding anyway, which they sort of increased the funding to basically add the Atkins component to it. And we'll just take a look quickly at this study. Let me just share the screen. Okay, so this is the American College of Rheumatology, and this is the sort of title they gave it: high protein diet, Atkins diet, and uric acid response. So they're basically general purpose and background. The reason why: conventional low purine dietary approach to gout offers limited efficacy, palatability and sustainability, and promotes an increased consumption of refined carbohydrates, saturated fats that can actually worsen gout, cardiovascular, metabolic comorbidities. What's saturated fat? We've been lowering saturated fat for quite some time. Yeah, we mean the fake sort of stuff that you get in margarine, the sort of trans fat or the hydrogenated shit, which they classify nowadays. They lump it all together, you know, how they think. So that's another bit of bullshit there. But anyway, we'll continue into the key stuff and ignore some of their nonsense. In contrast, effective dietary approach to reduce CV, cardiovascular, metabolic conditions, including obesity, could also lower serum uric acid levels by lowering adiposity and insulin resistance. These are really important things, but not so much the adiposity. People's basically metabolic markers improve only when you lower this. You could be a tofu, you know, basically thin on the outside, fat on the inside, with a lot of visceral fat accumulation, a lot of fat droplets endemically throughout a lot of the organs, in particular the liver and to some extent the pancreas. So insulin resistance is the real one. They should not lump, because there can be people that are quite insulin sensitive and have quite a lot of love handles and a lot of subcutaneous fat, and be, you know, quite relatively healthy compared to many thin people. So similarly, high protein, low carbohydrate diets such as the Atkins diet may lower serum uric acid despite substantial purine loading and the ketogenic diet. But I've always looked at, you know, most of the actual research has been on the ketogenic type diets and all that, which really lower substantially, your insulin levels, but also tend to be much lower in protein compared to a more carnivorous diet that tends to be about, close to about 30% to 35% in that regard. So indeed, a small study of 13 employed a high protein diet with reduced calories, found that the mean, and that was with reduced calories, found that the mean serum uric acid decreased from 9.6 to 7.9 mg per deciliter, with reduced gout attacks over 16 weeks. So additional benefits included an improved lipid profile. We investigated the SUA response to the Atkins diet amongst overweight or obese individuals over a 6-month period. So this was the study population was derived from the direct intervention randomized controlled trial, which was the Israeli one, of overweight or obese participants with a BMI equal or greater to 27, the Atkins diet, high protein, low carbohydrate, and that was a more high, because the traditional Atkins diet is a very high protein diet, more closer to the carnivore diet. I mean, Atkins, if you ever look at a plate that Atkins used to hold, it was full of basically a couple of steaks, couple of eggs, some cheese, and there was just a small amount of vegetables, like a bit of tomato, a bit of cucumber, and a bit of, bell peppers. It was basically, like very carnivorous. I mean, something that most carnivores would basically recognize, which is good that they did approach it more closer to the original diet rather than the new Atkins diet, which I've sort of mentioned in terms of Eric Westman out of Duke University. But I think the traditional one is more closer to the sort of stuff that we're looking at. So we use the serum sample at ADC to compare the serum uric acid levels. We'll just call it SUA, just for short. At baseline and 6 months, amongst 74 participants with complete data sets, and analysed the SUA level, response, as well as lipid profile, weight change, fasting insulin levels, and glucose levels. Okay, let's take a look at quickly the results. We're not going to go into all the stats and all that. You can actually just see, there's the drop. It's quite clearly everybody was dropping. Some people dropped from just 10.5 all the way down to below nearly 4. So genetics are important, play a role, so always keep, but generally the trend line was going down, and a number of other things improved as well, but that is not the purpose of what we are doing here. So let's go back to the study. Results. Mean age was 51, so the average age, and the mean BMI was 31. So we're talking about, 31's at the low range of obesity. So we're talking about most people were in either quite obese, a few of them probably overweight, because it was, remember what it said in the beginning, equal or greater than 27. So we're talking about the upper end of overweight. And I don't think these people were overweight because they had big muscles. They weren't pumping iron. So it was fat. Because BMI is one of those funny things. If you can be a bodybuilder and have a lot of muscle and have a very high BMI, but be ripped. So, you know, but when you're looking at over the average person who's unfit and all that, yeah, it's a good marker. Most participants, 91% were men. The overall rate of adherence to the diet in direct was greater than 95%, which is good. During our 6-month study period, baseline was 6, and the overall SUA change at 6 months was minus 0.8. And these are the averages. Okay. This change varies substantially according to baseline characteristics. We already looked at that. Participant base levels, individuals, number 18, SU levels were around the 7, about above the saturation point, showing a decrease in the mean SUA levels from 7.9 to basically 5.5. So we got a good drop within that period, and that is the p-value. And I'll just show the actual, oops, not that, this one. So when we're looking at that sort of p-value, we're talking about statistically highly significant, which is less than, so less than 1 in 1,000 chances of being wrong. Okay, so we can pretty much say that they measured these quite well. So there wasn't much of a chance of error here. So we got a good p-value for statistical significance, that these reductions were well measured. And, you know, it just indicates that, and let me just follow down to the other stuff, which is really important. That's probably unimportant. Most of this sort of stuff, the HDL total and all that, is not something that, I mean, they did say beneficial includes significant improvements in HDL cholesterol, total cholesterol, HDL ratio, triglycerides, and fasting insulin. So again, good confidence interval, you know, that it was statistically significant that these reductions happen. But we know that. I mean, the only people that basically hyper-respond are people who are very lean, who are doing a lot of exercise, so generating some gluconeogenesis, and tend to actually increase the export of triglycerides. And so they tend to obscure those markers, because when you're pushing out more VLDL for energy, because you need energy somehow, you need to get it from somewhere, the consequence of those markers go up. But that hyper-responding is lean hyper-responders. Dave Feldman's spoken about, and they usually tend to be an ApoE of 4 or 4.3, a few 4.2. So it's not really the others. I mean, I noticed for myself, I'm in the lowest, and without even doing the protocol today, I was in the 3.7 and even got it down to even lower than that. So not that that's my goal, you know, so we're just sort of saying that keep that in mind. For me, this is unimportant, these lipid factors, because they're genetically driven, as Bart would know quite well. So it is, you know, unless these lipids are oxidized and damaged, you know, I don't give a shit. But just for the hell of it, you know, I decided to mention it. Anyway, let's move on. Conclusions. Our findings suggest that the Atkins diet, that is to say, a high-protein diet without calorie restriction, and that is basically what we carnivores do. We don't basically sit there measuring like the old keto people. We just basically enjoy our steaks. So, had reduced, let me make that clear, reduced serum uric acid levels despite substantial purine loading. Okay, the effects may not may be more pronounced and clinically meaningful amongst those with hyperuricemia or obesity. Comparative effective research with other people CV, cardiovascular, metabolic diets would help determine the optimal dietary approach to lower SUA levels. As far as I'm concerned, look, they can say whatever they, if they do a specific diet that may help us, I don't give a shit. Personally, this is the argument that always been that high purines are the issue. They're not. High purines aren't the problem. Dysregulation of the uric acid. Uric acid is an important antioxidant. Your kidneys use most of their energy to recycle two things into, and that's uric acid and sodium. They don't do it for a joke. They are genetically designed to do it. That means it's important. The only thing that actually causes dysregulation of uric acid and sodium is basically high insulin because of the water retention. The only thing that causes endothelial problems, again, high insulin that holds water and changes the morphology of the endothelial cells and causes these sort of changes in structure. Everywhere you look, it's insulin driving metabolic syndrome, driving all these disease profiles. So you really basically have to bring insulin resistance under control to eliminate most of these problems. It always has been high insulin and this sort of metabolic syndrome and which cause high levels of inflammation that just exacerbate the pathology and drive the pathology. And that's the stuff that we need to focus on. It's quite clear when you do a clean, high protein diet, which is clean, it doesn't have a whole lot of fucking sugar and a whole lot of treats, keto treats, and all the sort of other junk that people throw in when you do a clean, and I mean, these people probably weren't 100% clean, but they were a hell of a lot more cleaner than the average person. They were doing high protein, but in a hell of a lot cleaner way. They didn't have the problems. Their gout symptoms receded. Their uric acids plummeted and got into the more natural levels where they should be. Regulated tightly within the amount that is required. Uric acid is not, you don't want too low, you don't want too high. You want it at a certain level to basically do its job, to act as an antioxidant because we don't produce vitamin C. But if you dysregulate that, you're going to create problems, I mean, even a bit of vitamin C, getting it from liver, organ meats of different types, meat in itself, getting small amounts in a low insulin environment where the GLUT4 receptor is quite pronounced, it will take it in. It doesn't need a lot because it's not competing. But if you use excess vitamin C, like throw in a whole lot of supplements and you overload the system, you give it more than it needs, what does the body do? It considers it a toxin and eliminates it by generating more oxalate. The body's telling you something there. A bit is okay, but too much, not a good idea. But what do people do? They constantly basically think more is better. So, I think that nails it quite clear there. These are clinical studies. These people have been basically doing this, being measured precisely with statistically good, confidence that it's not a chance. This is, these results are consistent, that if you do this, you get this result, and they're very statistically significant. So we can basically say that high protein diet isn't a problem. But if you throw in there honey and other sugars and other stuff like that, and spike insulin, then you're engaging the Randall cycle and you're engaging insulin resistance. And then it becomes a problem. But it's not the meat. It's the problem that you threw in the sugar and initiated a Randall cycle, you know, inflammatory process. And you basically pushed up insulin. Rather than being at the physiological lower levels to still promote muscle protein synthesis and do its job because it's still a necessary hormone, you basically forced it into, you know, these unnatural, unhomeostasis type levels, which we've been doing now for at least 70 years because we've all been fearing fat and we've been dumping so much sugar into our system that we've been creating these problems. You know, blood pressure, water retention in the endothelial cells, which basically means that they bulge and they increase blood pressure. You know, this is not rocket science. When you eliminate the sugar and you reduce insulin resistance, what happens to your blood pressure? It drops. And if you take some of the supplements that I do, like taurine, choline, and or citrulline, God, it fucking drops even more. Sometimes I have to be careful not to drop it too far with some of these things to, you know, moderate my supplementation. But, you know, here's a person that suffered before from these sort of issues and now doesn't suffer, and many other people, because basically when you eat a species appropriate diet, you shouldn't be. It's only when you freaking put a whole lot of sugar, refined sugar in there, that you're going to create problems. So anyway, I hope that was just a bit of just to cover uric acid and purine and some of the myths around, you know, the so-called dangers of high meat consumption, which is crap. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. See yous.